I very much admire. Krystal Ball from Breaking Points is joining us. All right, Krystal, thanks for coming, mate.
Thanks for having me. You're setting the bar a little high, though. I'm getting nervous now.
Don't get nervous. You look like you could be a mid-ranking officer in Star Trek in that fantastic outfit.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We wanted to start by talking about the French protests and what can be drawn when talking about the, I don't know, is it the downfall, the demise of neoliberalism? And we wanted to look at whether or not you personally feel that it's too late to reform centre-left parties, but to accept that with the ongoing militarisation of the police force, this tendency for centralising authority and crushing dissent, whether change from outside of the system is going to be required. In fact, isn't that what protests and riots ultimately are? So I just wanted you to contextualize the protests in France alongside what's happening in your country for us. Thank you.
Well, I think of neoliberalism as a sort of zombie ideology, which has clearly failed and been rejected by all sorts of people all around the world as failing to really serve the interests of the people. So you end up with governments and economies which should be there to serve society, to serve the people, and instead are serving a group of elites and sort of multinational corporations. But I call it a zombie ideology because even as the failings of it have been exposed and rejected, it still holds a lot of power, as we see obviously in the UK, as we see in the US with Joe Biden, as we see in France with Macron being able to win re-election with, he had like a 30% approval rating. When he won re-election, and by the way, Joe Biden's chief of staff pointed that out as a model for how Joe Biden himself could get reelected even as he is tremendously unpopular. So that's how I sort of see the ideology of neoliberalism. As far as whether it can be reformed within the system or what sort of tactics might work, I think you need a whole of body politic approach. So the sort of protest movement that you see right now in France, and incidentally, that's being very successful right now in Israel as well, that's not just people marching the street with placards, but is people shutting down airports, shutting down commerce, shutting down transit, and really hurting neoliberalism in the capital where it really hurts. That is tremendously powerful. That's one essential piece. I think another essential piece, and all of these are about basically, small d democratic weapons. Another piece is in building out the power of labor and labor unions. That's obviously an instrumental part in having power when you go to protest and when you go to have a general strike, that you have people who are working together in solidarity to have that kind of an impact. But then I think another piece is electoral politics. In the American context, we take for granted that the Democratic Party is what it is and the Republican Party is what it is. But these parties are just collections of people. And the Democratic Party of the past, when it was the FDR New Deal Party, meant something very different and stood for things that are very different from what the party does today. So, I think the people who run the DNC are a bunch of posers who could, be supplanted by a real movement of the people and sort of hijack that party to restore it to its roots of serving the interests of the people rather than the interests of the donor class.
That's an exciting proposition, but even in recent electoral cycles, we've seen that party, it feels like from within, scupper the attempt of a more populist leader in the form of Bernie Sanders, who I figure you were well into. And it makes me feel like that, in a sense, the part of the function of these institutions is their ongoing preservation and the ability to stymie any serious reform. So I recognize what you're saying is that without populist uprising outside of political systems, such as we are seeing in France and, as you added, Israel, there is no incentive or likelihood of that kind of internal change happening. Like in recent,
right.
The Clinton-Sanders stuff is a good demonstration of that, would you say?
Well, I'll give you a perfect example of that, and I think your point is spot on. So right now, Joe Biden, he hasn't officially announced for re-election, but he's likely to. And he has a progressive primary opponent who was announced in Marianne Williamson. And Democrats, for all their talk about democracy during January 6th, et cetera, now that it's time to actually put to a vote among Democratic primary voters, okay, who do you want to be your nominee? And we know from the polls that an overwhelming majority would like Joe Biden to step aside, and they would like to have options in this primary. They've already switched around the order of the states to try to rig the primary election for Biden. And they're also already saying, we're not even going to have a debate. So you don't even get to hear on a stage what the various platforms are. So there is no doubt that when it comes down to it, they have zero commitment to democracy. They will use any authoritarian tactics, just as Macron did in France, to try to maintain their power. The only thing that can shift them from that stance is a populist uprising that forces their hand, that demands a debate, that demands a real primary, that demands a real democracy. And I think those are the only sort of choices. Neoliberalism, it's no accident that it's being forced, leaders like Macron and Biden are being forced to use increasingly authoritarian authoritarian tactics in service of maintaining their power, because, it has sort of been revealed as this rotten ideology that doesn't deliver on its promises. The only response to that is a truly populist response, which really means, handing power and people reclaiming power both in their workplace through labor unions, both in the streets through protest, and also by taking back electoral politics. So you have to have all three of those pieces, in my opinion.
Cool. I feel like the professional neoliberal centre-left kind of hates working people, and that kind of contempt comes through continually in their rhetoric. Marianne Williamson's coming on this show next week. I love what you said there about the institutional and centralised authoritarianism that would corruptly rejig the order of those sort of state elections in order to prevent any momentum or even debate. And that makes me feel like why would I grant any airtime to that kind of political body with that kind of mechanic? A slightly more trivial question before moving on to things that are a bit more intense. It just occurred to me then, Krystal, do you see now when Joe Biden makes one of those errors where he sort of accidentally says, that's why I love China when he's in Canada or whatever, that people laugh straight away with that and do not product placement that drink you should be drinking, kombucha or something healthy rather than that evil brew, stinking Coca-Cola. Oh, no,
it's I'm sure it's fine brew. Don't evil, but it's delicious.
Don't give him a pack shot, you maniac, right next to your electrifying white smile, you lunatic. That's worth thousands. Get your agent on the phone. I'll do that deal. When Joe Biden does that, stuff, and he makes, have you noticed they started laughing now? Do you think that that's something that's happened as a result of a spontaneous cultural movement, or do you think someone goes out and briefs before Joe Biden appears on stage and goes, if he makes one of those errors, just chuckle along with beloved old Uncle Joe to sort of soften the evident ineptitude and the horrible metaphor that ineptitude represents of a kind of atrophy and cadaverous power? In fact, when you say zombie neoliberalism, it is convenient that there's an actual zombie running the country.
Yeah, true. He's like the sort of semi-living embodiment of exactly that. Look, I think when people are uncomfortable, they tend to laugh because they don't know what else to do. And so when you have incidents like, I don't know if you remember the one where there was a congresswoman who died in a car accident and he had sent out a letter of condolences to the family, and then he's at this event and he's calling for her, Jackie, where are you? In any case, there are clear signs that he's not the politician that he used to be. Now, listen, if people are able to see him on a debate stage and hear his ideas for the country and defend the areas where he's made clear promises and completely failed on, and in a completely open democratic fashion, that's what the American people decide to go in the direction of, okay, that's democracy. But what they are trying to do, because they know that he's in an incredibly precarious and fragile position, is they're trying to shut down any ability for people to hear an alternative whatsoever. It really reveals their hand of how weak they think that he is. And then they also have the issue of Kamala Harris as vice president. She's even less popular than Joe Biden is. And not only is she a heartbeat away from the presidency, she's a heartbeat away from a president who, would end the next term at 86 years old. So this is a series of really compounding problems for them that they don't quite know how to deal with other than through authoritarian, anti-democratic tactics. The only choice is for us to reject them and say, listen, whatever you think about the issues, whatever you think about Marianne Williamson or Joe Biden, the American people at least deserve to have an open forum and an open debate, because we're at a critical juncture in our nation's history and in world history where it's never been more important to have that open discussion and debate of ideas and visions for the future.
I am really encouraged by what you say, Krystal, about how populism can advance existing political structures, because I tend sometimes out of despair to feel like, there's no point, it's so corrupt, it's so broken. The only thing it's worth doing is protest. The only thing that's worth doing is establish alternative systems. But I see how, as you describe, it could influence existing political structures were we to be more vocal and aggressive, and I don't mean that obviously in a violent sense, in our protest and opposition and non-compliance to the corruption within these systems. And I wanted to ask you,
if I could just insert in that, I'm talking a lot about the Democratic Party, but there's a similar process that's playing out in the Republican Party right now. I mean, there are some real schisms that have emerged in the Republican Party that are a real, potential source of democracy and reform as well. So, I don't see this as a sort of one-sided opportunity to change the tenor of our country or the world or change the landscape. But it's not going to come without a fight. There's no doubt about it. I mean, the people who have power are not going to just willingly give it up to a group of renegades, whether it's operating within this party system or within a third party. With the mechanics of the U.S. political system, as much as Bernie Sanders was shut out in 2016 and again in 2020, he still came a lot closer than a third party is able to come, just because of the, fundamental structure of first past the post voting and how this ultimately works. So I just think from a pragmatic standpoint, you're likely to have a better shot of success going for hijacking one of the existing political parties than coming from the outside.
Thanks, Krystal. You're quite right that pressure should be bipartisan. I wanted to ask you, do the current TikTok stop drinking that drink, do the current TikTok congressional hearings demonstrate the evident and ongoing hypocrisy that exists in American politics, in so much as almost every facet of attack that's being explored, whether it's the surveillance, the data capture, the apparent collaboration with the state, could be leveled at American social media companies or global social media companies? And I want to tie this too to the sort of subject we were just discussing, meaningful change within the system or even beyond the system. Do you feel that if either the Republican Party or the Democrat Party or an independent party stood on a platform that included banning politicians from having a second job, banning politicians to trade in stocks and shares full stop, or having any dependent child or spouse own stocks and shares, and making it illegal for either party to receive corporate donations, only individual funders, and even then in a very regulated way? Do you think that, essentially getting money out of politics, ending lobbying, ending congressional stock trading, ending the sort of funding of the parties by finance and big business would alter the landscape of American politics so radically that, that it would actually bloody well work and be meaningful? And what kind of opposition would those kind of ideas face, and how would they stop it happening and sort of loophole their way out of it?
Well, I think it'd be dramatically popular with the American people. And you see this from time to time. Leaders, congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle were sort of forced to pretend like they cared about banning stock trading in Congress. And both Nancy Pelosi, back when she was Speaker, and also Kevin McCarthy, when he was running to be Speaker of the House, pretended like they wanted to take action on this issue because they knew it was so popular and so politically powerful. And then now that Kevin McCarthy is actually Speaker of the House, you haven't heard anything about it anymore. That just sort of died. Even the renegades that challenged him in terms of a speakership, that was not one of the concessions that they extracted. And Nancy Pelosi found a way to effectively kill, some real, genuine bipartisan efforts that might have had some teeth in that direction. So they use it as a political cudgel as it serves them, but then make sure that there is no actual change that happens. Do I think that getting money out of American politics would make a difference? Absolutely. I think it would absolutely, transform the landscape of American politics, because we ask ourselves so many times, why, when you have things that are so incredibly popular, things like making sure people have paid sick leave, or that union membership is available to people, or that people have a living wage. I mean, these are massively popular issues. Why is there never any action? And frequently, corruption is a core part of the story. And if we go even one level deeper than that, this is really, going back to France, this really is the core of the rot of neoliberalism, which says profits and money above all else. So of course, if that is your system and that's the altar that you worship at, then you're going to end up with a system that is rife with corruption. So I think that's, kind of the root of the problem, and they'll do everything they can to protect the status quo as it exists, because the people in power, they got there because things work well for them the way that they stand right now.
It means to me that that's an interesting edifice to focus attack on, because it exposes the areas in which both parties plainly agree and will use rhetoric around it, but won't implement legislation around it. And it exposes that, as Chomsky says, where both parties agree, you have no choice at all. And to sort of introduce that and popularize those ideas, I feel like would be a really interesting way of radicalizing political debate in a meaningful way. Krystal, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for endorsing that soft drink, which I think has links to Alzheimer's. I don't know. That's allegedly at this stage.
Listen, we have to exist in society as it is, Russell, until we can revolutionize in it. So I'm just here existing in society with my Diet Coke.
You, like Gareth Roy, are a positive influence. You are the voice of reason and the taste of Diet Coke simultaneously. Krystal Ball, thank you so much for joining us. You can catch Breaking Points every Monday, Tuesday and Thursday on YouTube, surely on Rumble soon. That's midday Eastern time. Thanks again, Krystal. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Thank you, Russell. It was fun.
It's lovely to speak to you. Thank you very much.